I'm going to talk with you today just quite briefly over career highlights, just to establish how I know what it is that I know. And then I'm going to go over some of the themes that are introduced in the book that I've written. This presentation is titled On Being a Listener because my whole adult life I've been a professional music listener in one way or another. I had zero interest as a child, really zero interest in being a performer or songwriter or anything like that. Yeah, I took a couple of years of piano lessons and resulted in pleasure for absolutely no one. I didn't feel any connection to it at all. What I was crazy about as a child was listening to records and the radio. I think I was born to be a record maker because being on input was what interested me the most, and I was able to make that fantasy become a reality by becoming a record maker as an engineer and producer, and then transitioning after great success, transitioning into being a college freshman in my 40s, University of Minnesota, earning my PhD in music perception and cognition, and then coming to Berklee College of Music to teach two things, to teach psychoacoustics and music cognition, and also to teach record production to our students there. So I started at the top. I started my career as an audio technician. You didn't see women engineers, or sure as hell didn't see women producers in the year 1978. Even in Los Angeles, where if you were going to see them, that's where you'd see them, but you just didn't. But I knew if I could repair the equipment, studying electronics on my own and things like that, I would be useful on sessions. And that worked out for me. I worked as an audio technician. In 1983, the phone rang, and I heard a sentence that would change my life. It was a dear, dear friend who said to me that my dream job was waiting for me, and that was to go to work for my favorite artist in the world, who was Prince at that time. I had all his records. I'd seen him in concert every time he came to LA. Huge Prince fan. Sure enough, he was looking for a technician. I was one. Not only did he want a technician, and he told his management, get me someone from New York or LA, because he mistrusted whether or not the local Minnesota folks would have the training necessary. Well, I was a technician in Los Angeles. Prince liked working with outsiders. He loved people that didn't fit the stereotypical mold of what you'd think someone would be. And it was his love of outsiders that made me attractive to him as a technician. He thought, well, not everyone's got this. He was right about that. And he liked working with women, of course. He gave Wendy and Lisa opportunities in his band. Wendy was fresh out of high school. She had her 18th birthday on stage with Prince. He gave opportunities to those outsiders in many ways. Anyway, and the other thing I had going for me is that he and I grew up on the same musical street, so to speak. We had the same taste in music. He could mention Frankie Beverly and Mays or One Way featuring Al Hudson, and I knew what he was talking about because I loved those same records. So we were a good fit for each other, and we did a lot of great work, starting with Purple Rain, the album, the movie, the tour. That was #1 on the Billboard charts for 24 weeks. As of a couple of years ago, that was the 6th longest run in history. So that did pretty well. The Around the World in a Day album, the Parade album, Sign of the Times, and then there were others, because Prince did something very rare in music. He created his own competition. He was smart enough to recognize a guy from the Midwest who's an unknown isn't as interesting as a scene happening in the Midwest. He created his own competition, The Time and Vanity 6 and Sheila E., and wrote these songs, recorded them, produced them, did the vocals, and then had the lead singer of whichever band overdub his vocals to pretend to be more than one artist to create a scene. He was smart as hell, and all of that worked. Anyway, I left Prince, came back to Los Angeles in '88. I was seriously burnt out at that point, and he needed a change as well. Can't always be with the same people. I worked on many records. In some capacity, I was the engineer. In other capacities, I was the mixer, and sometimes I was the producer and engineer. The great Hugh Harris is there, and Robin Ford, Julia Darling, the Odds, David Byrne, Geggy Taw, who taught me more about music than anyone. And then in the late 90s, I worked with Bare Naked Ladies from Canada. The Stunt album was hugely successful, #1 single and lots of awards. And in the days before Napster and file sharing, producers made a lot of money. Sorry, your generation, but blame the generation right in front of you for inventing that. It was their fault. But we used to make a lot of money when people would go to the store and buy music. And with that money, I decided, I'm in my mid-40s, I'm making alternative indie music, and I don't listen to alternative indie music anymore. I think I would enjoy the work of a scientist. So I did. I took that money, went to the University of Minnesota. Go Gophers. That's Goldie Gopher there. And we had to be the Gophers because it's so cold there that we would get to different classrooms and different campus buildings by going through these tunnels underground. The Gophers. Very intimidating beast. Anyway, I did 4 years there, majoring in neuroscience and psychology, experimental psychology. Went further north up to Montreal to McGill, which happens to be the home of, it's the mecca for music perception and cognition research. Got my PhD there, and 2008 came a little bit further south, came down to Boston to teach at Berklee College of Music. And then I was invited by a fellow named Ogi Ogas, who's a professional co-author. He invited me to write a book about music, and I said, you don't want me. I don't know very much about music. My friend the other day had to tell me what a natural symbol was, because I didn't know what it was. You don't want me writing about music. Ask my students, they know more about it than I do. What I can write about is music listening, because that's what I've been doing my whole life, is being on input as musicians are on output. It's a perfect match. So he said yes, and we wrote this book, and that's its groovy, psychedelic camouflage hardcover, which I think might become a collector's item. The artwork was done by a New York artist, and it is wild. For the paperback, which just came out a couple months ago, they Barbied me. They made it hot pink, which I don't care. They know what they're doing, I guess. Their job is to sell books. By they, I mean the publisher. So there's 2 different covers. In the book, I am presenting a model of music cognition based on the things that I learned in 8 years of college, the work of my PhD, the things I learned in 22 years in the recording studio, and some things I learned at Berklee as well, a lifetime of listening. It turns out when listeners are hearing a record they've never heard before, when they put on your music, what the brain does is it scans the elements on that record. And what the brain is doing is hunting for treats. Where are those treats gonna be? Those treats can be found in at least 7 different places. 4 of those places are musical elements. 3 of those places are aesthetic elements that apply to things like movies and books and TV shows and paintings and dance and things like that. So 7 different ways that we find a treat. And when you find a treat, it means your brain releases a little bit of dopamine. A little bit. It feels good. The reason most of us have a wide variety of music that we like is different records give us our treats in different elements. If it's groove that I want, well, I've got lots to choose from, but more recently I've been listening to Eddie Palmieri, Latin music, and they're grooving so hard, it's crazy. But if I want lyrics, I might go for Lana Del Rey, might go for someone else. If I want melody, I'll go for another artist. If I want sound design, maybe I'll go to Martin Garrix or somebody like that. We're getting our treats in different places because, this is the main thesis of the book, over time, each and every one of us forms a unique listener profile. And as we say in psychology, all the music you listen to is filtered through every piece of music you've ever heard in your life. You know where you found treats in the past. So you listen to a new piece of music, hunting for where you might find treats again. And if you don't find any, you're likely to say to your friend, it's okay, but you'll never voluntarily play that record again because it didn't have a treat for you. In this way, music functions a lot like food and fashion. Something either works for you or it doesn't. Anyway, let's go through the 7 dimensions. I want to leave time for questions. I keep an eye on my watch. So the first 3 dimensions I'm going to talk about of music listening refer to the aesthetic dimensions that are common to all works of art. And the first one, the one that I wanted to talk about first, is authenticity. And this refers to where in the body you think those musical gestures are coming from. When we say that a singer is singing her heart out, we're feeling like it's coming from her heart. When we say that bass player is flirting on that bass part, that bass player is flirting with you right now, that might be coming from the hips or below the waist. Sometimes an artist is such a god or goddess of technical perfection that they can give you music from the neck up, whether it's Bach or it's Goddess of Goddesses, if it's Ella Fitzgerald. It's technical perfection. That's not to say that Ella didn't have soul. She did. But music listeners tend to have a preference as to where they like their musical gestures to come from. My co-author likes music from the neck up. He likes Bach. To me, he's a little too careful for my taste. He likes the Beatles, which was never my favorite thing when I was young. It felt okay, it was smart, but it didn't give me that love, it didn't give me that dopamine. First time I heard the Rolling Stones, however, music that comes from the waist down, music that's rooted in the blues, I felt a little bit more like, yeah, I think I like this a little bit better. So I'm showing Howlin' Wolf over there as well. I love Howlin' Wolf, who was a huge influence on the blues rock artists of years ago. Howlin' Wolf had all kinds of technique, but when he sings in that guttural manner, you feel like he's pulling music up from his belly button. So we have preferences as to where we like our music to come from. And sometimes, as my friend Tommy says, sometimes the wrong note with gusto sounds way better than the right note played timidly. You play music with gusto, you can win over a lot of fans who like their music to come from the neck down. This little diagram is showing us a famous diagram in the musical arts. When we start out making music, we're all naive. We don't know what we're doing. We haven't taken any music lessons. We're little kids. We're banging on pots and pans. We start out naive, knowing nothing. If you get music lessons, you get to work your way toward what's called the sentimental. It doesn't mean sappy or maudlin. Sentimental means you can be like Beethoven, someone who can write a song expressing jealousy while you're not feeling any jealousy. Write a piece of music that expresses anger, even though you're in a really good mood, or that expresses the heartbreak of a breakup and you're happily in love. You can express sentiments musically that you may not be feeling. A lot of musicians at Berklee, young musicians, think that's the goal, get to that point. No, you're only halfway there. It's not a straight line, it's a circle. As Miles Davis would famously tell his musicians, play like non-musicians. He doesn't mean play sloppily. Play in such a way that you've forgotten about technique and you're focused just on communicating. Music is a communicative art. Work your way back to the feeling you had when you were 4 years old and were banging on pots and pans. Work your way back to being naive, but with all the technique at your fingertips or in your voice. Realism versus abstraction refers to how we like to visualize when we're listening to music. Not all people experience visualizations as they listen, but the majority do. So in 1983, English painter J.M.W. Turner took his paints down to the Calais Pier, and he painted what the world looked like. This is a ship coming into port. That's what painters did in 1803. You captured reality. And then somebody came along in the 1840s and said, essentially, hey dude, check this out. I showed him a brand new technology, a camera. I'm gonna squeeze this bulb, it's gonna be a flash. A little while later, go to the dark room, and I've got a photograph. Now most painters at that time thought to themselves, we're screwed. Because this guy with this new technology can come over to my house, take a photograph of my family, it won't take long at all, and I'm out of work. But J.M.W. Turner was smarter than most painters, and he realized, no, I'm not screwed, I'm free. I don't have to capture what the world looks like anymore. I can capture what the world feels like. And he went back to that same pier in 1842 and painted what's considered to be the first abstract painting. That's what a snowstorm at sea feels like. I read this in a book called Reductionism in Art and Brain Science by the Nobel laureate Eric Kandel, and I thought, yes, that's exactly what happened to my colleagues and me right around the year 2000 when someone came up to us with a laptop and said, hey, dude, check this out. Perfect kick drum, dink, 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 dink. You want a didgeridoo? Right here. I just got it right here. It's in this little box. And most of the engineers who had perfected, oh, this was hard, perfected the art of choosing and manipulating microphones and audio signals, compressors and EQ to capture reality. Took years to be great at that. Kid standing next to me, he's got a perfect kick drum with just dink, 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 click of a mouse. Some music makers, the smart ones, recognized, no, I'm not screwed, I'm free. I don't have to learn the techniques to capture reality with microphones. I can create a musical world that doesn't exist, that is abstract, which is what your generation is doing now with sound design tools. Manipulating sounds that don't match physical reality. We're getting some really awesome music in this generation from people who have freed themselves from the notion of capturing the reality of what the musical world sounds like and creating more abstraction. This is the third and final aesthetic dimension, but this is an important one. It's novelty versus familiarity. I've taken the very famous, familiar, common bell curve of behavior and applied it to music. So on the y-axis, we would say music consumption, sales, streaming, whatever. And on the x-axis, we have the degree of complexity or novelty in the musical stimulus. The simplest music of all, on the far left, doesn't sell a lot. That would be children's music. Adults don't buy it. The most complex music of all, on the right, would be free jazz. Not a lot of people buy that either. I had a conversation just last week with a Berkeley student who does free jazz. Good luck, son. Good luck. It's gonna be rough. It's gonna be rough. They're great, great, great. But you know, with free jazz, the idea is to be as unpredictable as possible. They don't conform to the rules of tonality, the rules of rhythm. Yeah. All right, so there you go. The music that sells the most is what we call pop music, which means popular. And pop music has managed, in this moment in time, which is important, they have managed to create works of art that have, for most people, a just right blend of novelty and familiarity. So, I don't know, let's listen to a Dua Lipa track in our heads, and you'll hear 4/4 time, 8-bar sections, familiar, familiar, familiar. You might hear a major key or something like that. Yeah, we all know that really well. Enough familiar items that we can anchor it to previous items we've heard in the past. We, the general listener. All right, I know what this is. I recognize this type of music. But enough novel items. Maybe in this day it's likely to be brand new sound design, or it might be brand new lyrical content. I'm thinking of Cardi B, Megan Thee Stallion, or it might be extra musical. It might be Lady Gaga wearing a dress made out of meat. She introduced novelty in herself as the artist and let her dance music be fairly traditional. So pop music manages to strike that perfect blend for right now. This curve is always advancing. So 10, 12 years ago, I think it was, reggaeton it was everywhere. It might have been 8 years ago, reggaeton, everywhere. Not as common now. It moves on pretty fast. Disco was once pop music. Funk was pop music. It moves forward, it moves forward. Smart record makers who want to make pop music tomorrow should be in front of that curve today. They should be making what we might call art music, music that has a higher dose of novelty than what you'd find on the pop charts. Some of those novel innovations out there on the right side of that bell curve are going to get incorporated into pop music tomorrow. Not all of them, but some of them will be. Some artists, the curve is going to pass them right by. They'll be considered ahead of their time. In fact, their time is years in the future, so it's going to be a while before it catches up to them. On the left side of the bell curve is what you would call classic music. That can be gospel, it can be bebop jazz, it can be classic rock. It's music where we know the form really well. A lot of music consumers like traditional folk music, like Chris Stapleton, like artists who have a heavier dose of familiarity than novelty, but their technique is so good. They manage to rise to the top of the style of music. They managed to rise to the top of the curve for that style of music. If you're making gospel music today, you won't sell as many records as Taylor Swift does, but if you're Kirk Franklin or someone like that, you're going to be selling as many as it's possible to sell. All right, let's go to quickly, we'll go to the four, check the time, all right. We'll go to the four musical dimensions that you're familiar with, and maybe just some items about that you're not familiar with. Melody reflects our native language. Little children are actually suspicious of little kids at school who listen to music that they would consider foreign. A new kid comes to school, is from another country, and the kids are talking about music and playing music for each other, and you ask this kid, what do you like? And the kid plays something from another country. Well, little children are going to be suspicious of that kid because elementary school children are just at that age where they're starting to realize that music represents an us, a tribe, a clan. Prior to going to school, us is just you and your family. But once you get to school, us is your little community. And most of your friends like the music that you like. People who grow up speaking one language will write melodies to reflect how the people who speak that language use their voices to communicate what they're feeling. So when we listen to music that's written by a composer who doesn't speak our native language, the melodies can sometimes sound a little bit foreign to us because those melodies would be well understood by someone who speaks that language, but maybe not by someone who doesn't. That's not to say we can't like music that's composed by people and speak different languages. I've got Ryuichi Sakamoto, I've got certainly Caetano Veloso, and I mentioned Eddie Palmieri before, people who speak a language that I don't speak in my library, but my go-to is music composed by people who speak English, and that's probably true for most of us if that's our native language. Now, our brain is divided up into two hemispheres for efficiency's sake, and for nearly all of us, with few exceptions. We process words over here in the left hemisphere, just above our left ear, and melodies, pitches, harmony over here on the right-hand side. What that means is you can get your treat from the melody and the harmony and completely ignore the lyrics. Many people say that they do. Sometimes they recognize, oh, this song is about, I don't know, whatever, fill in the blank. I'll go back and listen to those lyrics a little bit later. Right now, I am savoring that melody. Some of us are more melodically inclined. We like firing up that right hemisphere, whereas others are more lyrically inclined. Lyrics reflect the principle of self-congruity. We tend to like artists who represent, or seem to represent, some aspect of ourselves. That doesn't mean that artist has to be your same race or gender or age. It just means the way that artist sees and writes about the world strikes you as being true. And on some level, you feel like if that artist met you, he might like you. You might have a conversation with that artist. So, The artists we feel most congruous with are artists who are expressing some aspect of ourselves that we would like to be. Down deep inside, we feel connection with. Rhythm is the first of our musical abilities to emerge. Human beings love to predict what's going to happen. Household pets do too. If you feed your pets at 6 o'clock every day, they love that. They get so excited because their little internal clock can tell it's almost 6 o'clock and they know what's going to happen. The supper dish is going to get set down. And when it does get set down, it makes them feel in control of their world. It makes them feel safe. The world is at least somewhat predictable. Same thing with little children. Musical rhythm has to be extracted from percussive instruments. It's one thing, and it's a fairly easy thing, to synchronize your hand motions, your tapping to, I don't know, a car's turn signal or a metronome, just a simple tick, 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 tick. Pretty much everyone can do that. But there are folks who are beat deaf. Beat deaf is like being tone deaf. Similar to dyslexia. Higher order circuits that are responsible for organizing perceptual items. In some people, they don't connect. And those people can hear a strong binary beat. They can hear a merengue rhythm, which is just 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and not move their bodies in sync with it. And that's kind of interesting, because most of us, when we're little toddlers, when we hear a musical rhythm, our brains perform an automatic extraction. It pulls out kick, snare, kick, snare, kick, snare. It starts to, on some level, parse that interesting things tend to happen after 8 bars, sometimes after 4 bars, sometimes after 12, and that lets us predict subliminally what's going to happen. We can predict when the next snare is going to come down. We can, when we get a little bit older, predict that this verse is about to go into a chorus, and it feels good. All of us have different physical attributes, so we all tend to have a certain dance that we like to do on the dance floor. People who go to rock clubs, or that's from my era, but maybe alternative indie or something like that, rock music, grunge music, that dance that goes with that is the up and down thing. It's the mosh pit kind of deal. It's the moving your body up and down, the pogo stick motion. Latin music, of course, has more syncopation and involves more hips, more side-to-side motion. R&B, I don't know about today, but when I was young, going to those clubs, the motion was front to back. It's got a cool front to back motion. So the dance you will do is the dance that represents how your body likes to move. The musical rhythms that you love tend to complement how your body likes to move. And if you hear music in a rhythm that doesn't complement how your body likes to move, it can feel just a little bit foreign and not your favorite thing. And then the last dimension is timbre. Timbre refers to how things make noise. When we are little, we are constantly causing the world to make noise. You're pulling the dog's tail, you're pulling your brother's hair, you're making mom scream, you're making the world make noise, you're banging on things, and you're learning how the physical world vibrates. You're also learning how people use their voices to calm you down, to amp you up, to warn you, to reprimand you. You're learning about those cues of dynamics and loudness and duration and things like that. So you're sitting there, you're in your high chair, you got your sippy cup, and your little plastic sippy cup, and you fling that thing across the floor. And that little empty sippy cup goes dook, 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 and you are, in your fast-growing little brain, making an association between plastic and hollow and things of that size, and dook, 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 dook. But if you get your little paws on a glass and you send that thing flying, it makes a very different sound. It hits the floor and it explodes and crashes. So right away you're learning about timbres. As you get a little older, as you're listening to music, especially if you're watching videos, and this is getting increasingly rare these days, but if you're seeing people actually play musical instruments, you're forming associations between a sound and what that instrument looks like. and you're developing your taste in timbre. Years later, if you're in the recording studio and you're choosing a timbre, you're going through patches, you're going through settings, maybe you're tuning a snare drum, maybe you're choosing the microphone to place on the kick drum, and you're in the studio keeping a running stream of decisions, and you're listening to those sounds and you're thinking, no, 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 until you move something just right, change something, and then you say yes. That's it. Where'd that yes come from? It meant that at some point that sound crossed a psychological boundary and went from, no, this will never work, to, yeah, that's perfect. That psychological boundary lives in your head and nowhere else. You've decided what constitutes a good sound, what constitutes a weak sound, the sounds you like, the rhythms you like, the melodies, the lyrics. The aesthetic styles that you like, that is your listener profile. A mind-blowing fact from auditory neuroscience is there's a triangle that connects your dopaminergic reward system with your motor system up here, how your body moves, and your auditory system, how you hear. And that little triangle, a lot of really thick connections. Turns out when you listen to something, a record that you just love it, you release a little dopamine, and what that does is it sends a command down to your auditory cortex to tell your auditory cortex right above your ears, yes please, more of that. Give me more of that. Be on the alert for more of that. That's the good stuff. That's the stuff we like. So you get, over the years, better and faster at recognizing the music of you. By that I mean the music that conforms to and lights up your unique listener profile. If you are a record maker for your profession, you'll get paid for that. You'll get paid to walk into that studio with your unique brain that no other listener has, who makes that decision of no, 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 yes, no, 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 yes, who listens to performances and timbres and grooves and parts and arrangements and says that'll work, or no, let's keep at it. So this is showing what's actually happening in our brains in a very crude diagram here. But what happens when we hear music, a piece of music we've never heard before? You walk into a club and there's a trio playing, let's say. The very first thing that happens is your lower order auditory circuits have to perform a really quick analysis of, there's a lot of noise in this room, there's people talking, there's glassware, there's noises from the kitchen, the blender, and stuff like that. But I think I'm hearing a guitar and a vocal, and a saxophone. So you perform an auditory scene analysis to identify, I think there are musical instruments going on here. Even if you didn't see it, you just walked in the front door and band's around the corner. You perform scene analysis, yes, there's music here. The first thing after that you attend to is what instruments are playing, what kind of music is this? Humans actually make a judgment in less than a second. In fMRI scanners showing brain activity, less than a second whether or not they like certain styles of music based on that timbre analysis alone. For electronic music, it takes half a second. For jazz and classical, it takes 3/4 of a second. If you like electronic music and you hear the timbres of classical, you're like, nope. You have to deliberately, consciously will yourself to listen a little bit longer to see if maybe you're going to like it or not. Anyway, we make a rapid judgment as to whether or not we might like this based on the timbres that we hear. From there, the signal splits off, and we can independently move our spotlight of attention over to the left, pay attention to the words, over to the right, pay attention to the melody, or up here, the motor cortex, pay attention to the rhythm. Then we can move that spotlight of attention out and scan the style, the authenticity. Are they really feeling those performances? The novelty. Are they doing anything new here? Or have I heard this 1,000 times? And the realism. I like this kind of instrumentation. These are real instruments. I prefer that to just somebody on stage with a laptop, you might say to yourself, or you might say the opposite. So, all right, good on time. I'm almost done here, and then I've got 10 minutes for questions. Picture your listener profile as having 7 sweet spots. Sweet spots conforming to where you personally get the greatest reward from music. For the aesthetic dimensions, that can be just unidirectional, or rather a single dimension, right? Something can be performances above the neck or below the neck. You might prefer abstraction or realism. You might prefer familiarity or novelty on your records. Of the 4 musical dimensions, one dimension's not enough. Think of it more as a space rather than one axis. But whatever, there are certain kind of melodies that move you, certain kinds of lyrics that you relate to, certain rhythms that feel perfect for your body, certain sound designs, timbres that perk you up and make you think, yeah, this is the street I live on. So any given new record only needs to match you on one of those dimensions for you to like that record. If it matches on 2 or more, you might instantly fall in love. And if that one match is strong enough, all the other things don't matter. The lyrics won't matter if that groove is exactly what you love. The melody won't matter. Maybe you're a melody fan. Maybe it's more monotonous, like a lot of rap music. The melody might be no melody to speak of. But that sound design is killing you. You could fall in love. So for the book, I went and asked some students and some musician friends of mine to describe a record that they instantly fell in love with on first listen. What it felt like. This person said, when I listen to this, I feel seasick, I get chills, but for some bizarre reason, sometimes I chase that feeling. He loved Eventually by Tame Impala. This person said, it's both threatening and inviting, but it conjures up a feeling of who I am. He went on to say, like being both the mosquito and the blood that it seeks. Funkier Than a Mosquito's Tweeter by Nina Simone. I get a feeling of empathy for the performance, but also a solitary feeling. There's so much internal adventure in there. Mojo Pin, Jeff Buckley. If you close your eyes and listen for the full 40 minutes, there's no way that you cannot cry. Goldberg Variations by Bach. It has a broodiness, a darkness, and I'm drawn to dark things. It sounds like it is speaking almost from beyond the grave. And she went on to say, like Emily Dickinson looking down at her own body. This is the great, if you don't know her, you should, Sheena Ringo. Oof. And this one said, there's a feeling that is solemn, but there's happiness and hope. If I knew that a nuclear bomb was coming, I'd put on that record. If you're a record maker, it can't possibly get better than that. Someone saying, I'd be okay if this was the last thing I ever heard in my life. What could this record possibly be? Broke Down Palace by the Grateful Dead. There you go. What this illustrates is how different each and every listener is. Every one of these records brought each one of these people supreme musical love and joy. I can't say that I feel that for any of those records. This shows us that our listener profile is unique, and musical artists, recording artists that are out here in this audience, you will never please everyone. Try to make music that connects with someone, with some people. Think about those dimensions. Think about your listener who is greedy and selfish and doesn't want to hear about you. They want to hear about themselves. Make music that functions for them and makes them feel like you represented them, you talked about them. You just made music that represents their life. And bear in mind that, like me, us non-musicians, the only way we get music is if you make it. We're the majority. We're the people who do not make music. We need you to make it. And then we decide what we want to listen to again, based on the music that you make. It's kind of a beautiful thing. So if you like this sort of thing, there's my Barbie paperback cover. I didn't have any say in it, but it's all right, I guess. And my doctoral advisor, Daniel Levitin, wrote This Is Your Brain on Music. It came out, I guess, 20 years ago now, and was a huge, huge hit. And then the marvelous Nina Kraus at Northwestern, in just outside of Chicago, wrote this book called Of Sound Mind. And she's a great, great auditory neuroscientist. So if you like this kind of thing, you might like any of these. And thank you, especially Dr. Schaefer. Thank you very much for inviting me. Appreciate it. Would anyone care to ask a question? Oh, in the back, yes.
First, I just want to say thank you so much for doing what you do. When I was a little kid and I told my mom I wanted to be an audio engineer, she said, if you want to make records, you need to make records that sound like this. And she handed me Sign of the Times. Ooh. So thank you. This is a two-parter, one personal, one technical. Personal is, as an engineer, speaking of as an audio engineer, tracking, mixing, whatever, how do you find the balance between the right and left brain of understanding rhythm, melody, and lyricism? And how do you able to switch to either side as you're tracking an artist or recording an artist or helping an artist produce a record? And also on that note, I also was curious about your approach to when the LM1 came out and how you were incorporating that into your studio sessions with artists like Prince. And how are you able to make that drum machine sound so, excuse my language, fucking good comparatively to today? Because that's not something I personally have figured out.
Right. All right. So the first question concerns, the logical, analytical sort of thinking versus the artistic thinking. I owe my career in music to being in touch with my listener profile. From the time I was young, I was very good at listening to music and deciding what I liked and what I didn't, and recognizing the phrase I like to use is the music of me. So I think as long as you're in touch with your own listener profile and what aspects of recorded music or live music, but let's stick with recording, what aspect of recorded music lights you up the most, that's what you're going to tap into when you're in the studio. A very, very clever student interviewed me a few days ago. She's up at Humber College in Canada. She asked a question no one's ever asked me before. She said, you're a scientist, you're obviously a logical, rational person. Did that ever get in the way of you making art? I thought, damn, that's a good question. The truth is, I suspect it might have a little bit. I think compared to the great musicians I know, I'm not as artistic as they, not anywhere near. The great musicians, and when you've been around them, you realize how good is out there. Good is stupid good. It's otherworldly good out there in the world. So I realize I'm not as deep of an artist as what they are, but I'm deep enough. I'm certainly deep enough to be a really great listener, and I can pull up my responses to anything in the studio very quickly. I can pull it up really quickly. This, of course, I'm in my 60s, so this comes from years of doing this. It takes a long time. But the faster you can get up to speed on that'll help you in the studio with your decision making. And then the other question about the LM1, when I joined Prince, he had enough money to buy those in those days. They sold for $5,000, and we're talking early 80s. That was a lot of money. But he had the LM1, and he loved it so much, and he did something unique with his LM1 in that he would take it had little faders representing each instrument, the kick, the snare, the cross stick, the hi-hat, the claps, the clave, the toms, all that. So you do a little sub-mix on it with these little faders, and then he would take the mix output and run it through his guitar pedals, his Roland Boss effects pedals. So he could click in flanger, distortion, chorusing, delay, phaser, just anything he was in the mood for. The man was a genius with rhythm and a genius with melody. You don't usually find those two domains at such a high level in one brain, but he just so happened to have that. So he taught me his ear. I joined him as a technician, not an engineer. He taught me his ear so that I could manipulate sounds to give him what he was looking for. Sign of the Times is a work of genius. Yes, please.
Do you think that with we live in a day of like shorter like attention spans with like everyone like on their phone and things like that. Do you think it's going to become like the artist's responsibility to be aware of that and then make adjustments accordingly and then add that to the creative process?
So music is, of all the art forms, the most like food and fashion in that we choose it to do work for us. We choose it to perform a certain function. And when you decide what to have for lunch, there are things going on in your body down deep inside that are telling you you crave this and not that. It's making a decision for you, antecedent behavior consequences. So likewise, when we choose a piece of music to listen to, there's a kind of result that we hope is going to follow. Now that result might be to fire up those circuits that respond to lyrics or respond to harmony or respond to style. It might please us intellectually. But music today, for many, many listeners, is functionally, it pains me to say it, something to keep them company. Something to linger in the background as they're pursuing other activities. So absolutely yes, today's music maker needs to be cognizant of that and to recognize that they're less likely today to have an active audience. They're much more likely to have a passive, not paying attention audience. This has led to choruses that are bizarre to me because they're so repetitive. The chorus will have one tagline, which used to come at the end of the chorus. Now it's the whole chorus. I wish you'd call me. 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 That'll be the chorus. I'd be thinking, you don't have anything else to say about that? I wish you'd call me. They're making a deliberate choice there because they recognize that the brain that is consuming, I wish you'd call me, is likely to be reading or playing a video game or commuting somewhere or involved in other things. There's not enough data, there's not enough empirical research reports to analyze this with any power these days. I definitely have been pondering it quite a bit because it affects my students and their future. But yeah, it's changing. It's definitely changing.